Ivonne Montealegre, and this is SiGMA Poker Tour's podcast, Poker Face. This is our last season's episode, and I'm here with someone very special. Cordelia Morgan Cooper, founder of CMS Consulting and an expert in recruiting, iGaming recruiting, and a promoter of women in gaming, supporter of women in gaming. Hi, Cordelia. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you. We did this chapter, we're doing this episode on recruiting because our viewers at home keep asking us questions.
Yep.
One of the questions they ask us is, how do I change my parachute? How do I get into iGaming?
I think it's such an interesting question, and I think there are so many different parts of it based on the environment and the market that we're in right now. I think the most important thing that anyone can do is focus on their personal brand. You know, you and I have touched on this when we've spoken at kind of women in gaming events. I think it's so important for people entering the industry to really focus on them, their brand, whether it's on LinkedIn, attending conferences, attending events, to really get themselves out there. Because a lot of the roles that people apply for are not actually ever advertised. It's through word of mouth. You know someone who's recruiting and you then meet someone and think maybe that person could be good. And so I think it's really important that people feel comfortable or are able to put themselves really out there. And of course, it's a scary thing. You have to attend conferences, maybe go on your own. You're speaking to senior people, but to push yourself out of that comfort zone, that's where you'll really start to see results.
Is there such a thing as an iGaming career, as an iGaming Institute studies CV? How do you get there?
You know what? I think it's changed a lot over the last kind of decade. I arrived in Malta in 2016 and I saw that, there are a lot of entry-level positions. We saw people starting in customer service. 5 years later, they're moving into maybe a content role, then into an operations role, and then kind of, reaching senior management. I think things have changed over the last 4 or 5 years. What I would say to anyone is just make sure that you're upskilling yourself as much as possible. Unfortunately, what we've seen with the market changing as much as it has over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, a lot of those entry-level roles, they don't necessarily exist anymore. With AI is not taking people's jobs, but it's making people more efficient. So a lot of those entry-level roles, they just don't exist anymore.
But you could, fresh from university, get an internship.
Yep.
What would you recommend to someone that is freshly graduating from university? Should they go to a recruiter or should they go to the website's career section? What would be the move here?
I mean, look, I always want all the business, so please, everyone, come to me. But I think, look, recruiters offer a unique perspective on the industry, and they're often able to get your CV in front of an actual client. If you look on LinkedIn, some roles have 400, 500 applications. I don't need to go through that process. I know the owner. I'm connected with him on WhatsApp. I send the CV directly. But of course, recruiters are also sometimes, can be compared to used car salesmen. They can also, there are good recruiters and there are also not good recruiters. So I think it's really important that if you're putting your trust in that person, that you build a bit of a personal relationship with them. Most good recruiters will want to spend time with the candidates that they're representing. And they would, my focus is always less candidates, but higher quality. I like to get to know the people that I'm working with so that then maybe if they're not right for the role now, in 2 or 3 years, we reconnect and then, they're the hiring manager of a new business and we then work together in that capacity.
Speaking of how the industry has changed and evolved in the past decade, 2 decades, what would you think are the major key points of this evolution or change in terms of recruiting?
Sure. I think the main thing is that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, everything was on the candidate. We were coming out of COVID. Candidates could demand salary. They could demand working conditions. They want to work from home, no problem. Now it has totally switched. The ball is 100% on the client side. The client will say, you need to come into the office. And if you don't want to, well, then you don't have to take the job. We've also seen a real trend in offers being negotiated. So whereas, for example, a candidate 2 years ago is looking for 200K, he gets to the end of a recruitment process and the client says, it's 150, you don't want it? I've got 3 other candidates. So things are really, really changing. And we're seeing the market's much more competitive now. And candidates really need to be aware of that where things were before, it's no reflection on their experience. It's just that clients are really spoilt for choice now.
One of our viewers was telling us, I mean, I've gone to 100 interviews.
Wow.
And I haven't gotten anywhere.
Yeah.
So there's more candidates than demand.
100%.
Right now.
You know, if we look at a lot of the big players, they've made huge redundancies over the last, few years. And with that means that you've got a lot of very highly qualified candidates all trying to get the same roles. If you look in Malta, there could be, 3 or 4 CEO roles advertised or, available at any point, but you could have 20 or 30 qualified candidates. We're quite a tight market here. So I think people also have to be aware that there are limitations sometimes to where you live. And if you've applied for 100 jobs and you've not got one, I would say you need to tailor the approach. And actually, that's not a great way of looking at it, because 100 interviews is 100 bits of disappointment, which then makes you feel like you're not a good candidate, and you are.
Absolutely.
And you need to be able to go into that interview confidently, knowing that, that company would be lucky to have you. So I would say focus, less is more. Focus on going for the roles that you really want, or connect with the leaders in the industry that you're really interested in, and from there start to build a relationship. I always tell the story of, I had always wanted to join Catena Media. I had worked for an online dating business. I didn't enjoy it. I found the environment really challenging, and I had always wanted to join Catena. And I literally hounded their leadership team for 3 months. Every few weeks, I would be there on LinkedIn, message after message after message. You can ask Jenny Arnell. And then finally, the stars aligned, and I think they just wanted to, yes, okay, Cordelia, we'll meet you. And it just so happened then that they were looking for a recruitment manager, and they offered me the role, and that started my whole iGaming journey. So I think you need to be comfortable in the current market with putting yourself out there. And, putting yourself out there is scary. Sometimes you will get a no. Maybe sometimes you feel the room and you get it wrong. But actually, by doing that, you can really then start to see some positive results.
Sounds a lot like poker, where disappointment plays a crucial part.
Yeah.
I mean, you get disappointed in tournament poker 10 times out of 12. Yeah. So how do you recommend that our viewers handle that disappointment?
I think, look, resilience is key in the market that we're in right now. I would also say to people, if you're not really unhappy where you are, now's probably not the best time to be looking for a new role. There are so many things going on in the market at the moment. Of course, people need to look for new roles, and sometimes it's not their decision. Sometimes that's taken out of their hands. But I would really say, try and build or try and get a thick skin, because there are a lot of people out there that will be saying no, and it's no reflection on you or your experience. It may just be that someone with 5 years more experience is willing to take the salary that you were looking for, and maybe you're not able to take that salary, for example. I think also, job hunting can be a really lonely exercise, and it can make you feel like you're not good enough or that someone else is better. I've always advised people to go out and get professional mentors, whether it's friends, business people that you are, inspired by. Sometimes I get the odd message on LinkedIn from someone saying, it would be really nice to have a chat. I've seen what you've been doing on this or this. And I'm always want to make myself available to people. I think that, to be able to be somebody that's able to offer some advice is really nice, because we all know that when we kind of join this industry, it can feel quite lonely as a lady too. You're pushing on. People say that you're too confident, you're too arrogant, all of those things. No, I'm not. I just know who I am, and that's what I want to bring to the table.
Thanks for your mentorship. We all know that you dedicate time, non-paid, etc., to your mentorship.
Yes.
And no wonder why you're nominated as one of the top
you.
10 iGaming professionals, men and women nominated. And we are very happy. And
Thank you so
you
much.
deserve it a lot. And we're very happy for you. What is the most glamorous job right now in iGaming?
Glamorous job. I think it really depends. I think, look, there are some really amazing executive assistant roles with some fantastic owners where, of course, you're traveling the world, you're going to beautiful events, but of course it's hard work too. You have to be immediately and often totally available. I think any role can actually be glamorous. It's just that you have to find the right bits to it. I think we're lucky that in the environment and the industry that we work in, that, you start in a job that is A to D, but suddenly you're doing like A to K and A to whatever. And I think that, when you go in, sometimes your role is very pigeonholed, but if you're willing to learn and eager to learn, often you can then help that role grow and you can focus on more of the things that you do enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some insights? What are the top 3 companies right now in Malta hiring?
Oof, that's a big question, and I wouldn't want to upset any of my clients, so I will politely dodge that question. But I think there are some really interesting roles at the moment, and I think what makes our industry so exciting is that there are businesses that are coming up that didn't even exist 2 years ago that offer really, really exciting opportunities. I think gone are the days of thinking like, oh, I need to go and join a 500, a 1,000 person company. You can go and join a founder and in 3 years, that team could then be 50, 60 people. And I think that that's what's quite unique to our industry, that, joining a startup, of course, comes with risks, potential risks, but also what can come out of that is like so exciting.
What about these new roles I'm seeing? Chief Visionary Human Experience, etc. Can you tell us some of these titles, and do they sustain themselves through the years, or is it a trend?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all seen the job descriptions of like SEO ninja. I'm not sure I really kind of like buy into it. I think it is a bit of a gimmick. I think people experience is a really interesting role because it sits not necessarily on the HR side, not necessarily on the recruitment side, but kind of like a partnership between the two. It's how, someone's onboarding all the way through to when they're offboarded, that whole cycle. And I think that actually as businesses start to professionalize more, you need to have that care throughout the life cycle of an employee.
Right. Do you think that service providers that are also part of the gaming industry, when we say iGaming industry, I find it very limited to think it's just the gaming operators, because there's the whole branch of services,
the whole ecosystem.
The whole ecosystem, correct? Are they reaching out?
Yes. I think, look, there's also a big trend at the moment for businesses to outsource their finance, their legal, their HR. I do HR consultancy for a number of gaming businesses because they don't necessarily want to have a full-time HR manager. It's great for me. It means that I can keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry, but it's also good for them because they don't need to have somebody full-time. Maybe it's 2 days a week, 2 days a month. And then it means that, they have that financial element that they can, then allocate elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Let's spark a little bit of controversy.
Let's go.
What happens when the work environment is toxic?
Yeah, I mean,
how do you navigate this as an employee?
I think that's a really, really interesting question. And I think that it evolves with time. I think you often don't realize the environment you are in is toxic. It's like a relationship. You're in the relationship, you really love that person. You start to see things and you think, oh no, it's okay. They'll be different tomorrow. It's kind of the same in a toxic workplace. Sometimes it gets to a point where somebody physically burns out, or there's a situation at work where they say like, enough, I can't do this anymore. I think the problem is that, in an environment and an industry where results are so important and, it's millions or tens of millions of euros or pounds, the incentive is to always work harder and for people to be pushed harder. And I think if you don't have a very stable work culture, that can then lead to people working, far more than they need to, or maybe far more than they should. But I also feel, and maybe this is a bit controversial, that it's our own personal cross to bear insofar as that if you know that you're having too much asked of you, there needs to come a point where you say, look, I understand that this is what you want me to do, but these are the hours I have in the day and it's not possible. I think it's easy when you start your career to be a yes person. I think we're all yes people when we first start. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I don't mind working here. Yes, I don't mind doing this at the weekend. Of course, we want to be amenable. We want our bosses to trust us. But I think there comes a point where you have to say, actually, I need to spend time with my family. I was actually really unwell and I ended up needing to come to work because you made me feel bad otherwise. I think that those conversations probably need to be happening a bit more. And, sometimes I meet candidates that they feel that they're ready to look for a new opportunity. And actually, it's the same as leaving a toxic relationship. They almost need to leave, take some time out, whether it's holiday, whether it's, sitting at home, eating popcorn and watching Netflix, whatever it is, to just take a bit of time. Because when you're entering a new job and you're also applying for new jobs, you've got to put your best face first. And unfortunately, if you're very burnt and very, tired and frustrated with work, you're not able to represent yourself in the best way possible, for sure. So I would always say to people, if you've had, a very heavy last couple of years, sometimes taking a sabbatical is actually really helpful.
Right. I like the metaphor with the toxic relationship, toxic environment, where you just sometimes can't change it. You just need to walk away, right?
Yes.
That's what you're
exactly
implying.
And I think that relationships come into a lot of what I do, because I also see recruitment as like matchmaking. I want to replicate the feeling, you go on a first date, you're excited, you have those kind of feelings. That's what I want to replicate between a client and a candidate. Of course, not on the romantic side, on the professional side, but that spark that you don't know what it is in that person, that's what I want to create. And so, I don't post any jobs anywhere. I go out super old school headhunting to find the right candidates for the role and to try and find that magic between, a client and a candidate.
Right, because rotation is very expensive for companies.
Very.
So your process is quite interesting if you do it right from the beginning.
Yeah.
What do you think about this work-life balance? And my workplace is like my family.
So I feel like family should never be used in a workplace environment, because I love my brother and sister, but I didn't choose them. In the same way with an employee, they are there to do a role. I heard, Alex Tomic from Alea, he talks about tribes. And I think that that's a really interesting way of looking at, your team, that you are a tribe. Of course, that people can then, be replaced, they are replaced, they leave. If they're your family, they're not ever leaving. And I think that that's important, because, you're spending a lot of time with the people that you work with. Of course, you're building proper relationships, but they're not of the family type. They're never at that level.
But how to get that balance when social media is asking us to have a profile open, to share our lives publicly, because that's what we need to have, a proper image and profile and focus on our product, ourselves as a product, yet having to be reserved in the workspace.
I think for every person, it's probably a little bit different. But I think if I look back on my early years of being a manager, probably one of the mistakes that I made, that people would, within my team probably agree, was that I wanted to be everybody's friend. And by becoming friends, it then made things very difficult when we needed to have serious conversations. And, I worked in environments where we then had to make, redundancies, and making redundancies with people where you knew every single bit about their life made it very hard. I think that there's a way to be able to be friendly on good terms, but having that balance of they're not quite friends. And I think that, the more senior that somebody becomes, the lonelier it becomes. It's much more lonely at the top. You have less people to be able to talk to, less people to be able to confide in, but also that's the kind of give and take of them moving into a senior leadership role.
One viewer asked us if we could relay this question to you. What are the top 3 biggest mistakes you've seen in an interview, in a job interview?
Top 3, I think, look, one of the key ones would be not preparing at all. Often we're speaking to candidates, we then put them forward for a role. I think it's very easy to be very underprepared. If you're going to a company, one of the first things you should know is why you want to join them, what you find, interesting or important about them and, the business. You've researched the job description for sure. I think, a lack of preparation, definitely. I think we touched on this as we were coming down the stairs. Salary, it's a really difficult one because although you want to be open and honest with the salary you're looking for, it's almost a bit of a dance because until you know and until the client knows that they're bought into you, it's hard that they would probably pay the higher end of the bracket if that's what you're looking for.
How do you navigate this question then? What are your salary expectations? Should you even answer that question?
So what I always say to my candidates is when I'm sending across their profile, if they're happy for me to say what they're on currently, package or salary, I will do. And then normally it's what their expectations would be, they would discuss with the client. But if I'm working on C-level positions, I normally don't send anything across and they will then discuss directly with the candidate because at that level, they're also dealing with so many different aspects of the business and salaries, of course, depending on location, can vary a huge amount.
Right. Thank you, Cordelia. Time has flown by. We thank our sponsor, Even Bet Gaming, for powering our podcast. And thank you very much for being here, my friend.